What's up guys, my name's Sky and I'm going to be walking you through this very first heroic iteration of raid testing for Kel'Thuzad. Periodically throughout the fight and based on his mana, Kel'Thuzad has two abilities you should be aware of, Dark Evocation and Howling Blizzard. Howling Blizzard is pretty easy to deal with, simply walk out of the ice on the ground to avoid the damage. Dark Evocation can be a little trickier since it'll not only summon some Frostbound Devoted adds, but also any dead players to fight by KT's side. The dead players have access to all their spells and abilities that are not on cooldown like MC players usually do, and they also have inflated health pools. The Frostbound Devoted are going to spawn periodically throughout the fight, not only from KT's mana pool getting drained, but also from the expiring pools dropped by Oblivion's Echo. It's important to note that these adds fixate on random players, and when they get within close proximity of their fixated target, they will cast Corpse Detonation, which deals a lot of damage. The Devoted can be CC'd, so make good use of stuns and knockbacks. Just note that when you do CC and cancel their Corpse Detonation, they fixate onto a new player. While killing the Devoted isn't the top damage priority in the fight, you just want to make sure you have good control over them and that nobody lets a Corpse Detonation go off. The main tanking mechanic throughout this fight is Soul Fracture. KT is going to knock back the current tank after dealing some damage to him and split his soul into 3 soul shards. These soul shards look like images of the tank and will spawn in random locations in the room. They periodically cast Piercing Wail, which needs to be interrupted. Piercing Wail simply deals room-wide damage, and it can line up with some pretty nasty other damage effects and prove to be deadly. The tank who ate the Soul Fracture will also be suffering from Soul Exhaustion. Each soul shard summoned leaves a stack of soul exhaustion on the tank, increasing their physical damage taken by a lot. Throughout the fight, KT is going to mark some players with Glacial Wrath, causing them to spawn Glacial Spikes. The Glacial Spikes are the trickiest part of this fight, and you really want to control them wisely. Every 2 seconds they lose 5% of their health, and when you kill a spike, it deals huge raid-wide damage, and it also applies a nasty stacking debuff. Our strategy with killing the spikes was to always have one dropped in melee range of the boss and to get cleaved down immediately. This gave us a lot of time to deal with the other spikes left that were up and to not have any nasty overlaps. Shatter functions the same exact way that bursting does in Mythic Plus. You don't want to kill a glacial spike before your debuff drops, or you're just going to add a stack and extend its duration. With spell queuing being a thing for this boss, our best advice for dealing with glacial spikes is always controlling when you're killing them and always killing one ASAP, preferably dropped in melee so it can instantly start getting cleaved down. You want to avoid having glacial spikes shatter when you have other mechanics to deal with, such as Frost Blast. Throughout the fight, KT is going to throw out Oblivion's Echo on random players and more of them. Simply have these players run out to a set location or side of the room. This is going to silence all allies within 10 yards of them in a circle telegraphed, and when it expires it drops a silence field. The reason you want to drop these all on the same general location is that Devoted are going to pop out when these silence fields disappear. Having the Devoted spawn in close proximity to each other will make it easier for your team to DPS them down and CC them. Frost Blast is a huge soak that your raid needs to divide evenly. It deals 165k frost damage and a bunch of damage afterwards, rooting players in place. It's important to deal with Frost Blast while you're not blowing up any of the Glacial Spikes. This is where having Glacial Spikes blow up at the wrong time becomes very dangerous. We heavily advise using healing cooldowns while dealing with the Frost Blast, and also utilizing Priest's Master Spell to get rid of the roots thereafter. It's also important to note that you can actually Turtle, Ice Block, Bubble, Spell Bop, and use any form of immunity to simply blink out of the raid and solo soak the Frost Blast, which is huge because there's certain times and certain overlaps where you don't want to be dealing with Frost Blast. So first let's talk about the phylactery, which happens when KT's health reaches 0. Players can simply run under KT's ghost form and click their extra action button to be transported downstairs into the phylactery. While inside the phylactery, you're going to be fighting the remnant of Kel'Thuzad. The remnant is pretty easy to deal with, and all of his mechanics are dodgeable. There's constant swirlies on the ground called shadowfishers. You're going to want to dodge them as they deal quite a bit of damage and knock you back. Freezing Blast is a big cone with an indicator similar to Jaina. Though Freezing Blast deals significantly less damage than shadowfishers in the room, it's especially dangerous because it will root you in place for 4 seconds, making you unable to dodge those fissures. Again, everything in this phase is avoidable. One last thing you should know about the phylactery is that everybody you send down there will be affected by necrotic miasma, which is simply stacking room-wide damage which ramps up over time. Every 1/3 of its health, the remnant is going to push and cast necrotic obliteration, which blows up the phylactery. Simply run to the portal that appears and click your extra action button to get transported out of the phylactery. Anybody who's not in the phylactery is going to have to deal with the March of the Forsaken. Your tanks are going to have to grab these abominations that cast Demolish. Demolish is a cone that you simply need to dodge. It looked like it alternated between targeting our tanks and a random player. The Soul Reavers weren't too big of a concern. They channel missiles on a random player that deal more and more damage, simply interrupt their cast. It seemed to lock them out for quite a bit of time. There will also be a few Frostbound Devoted that spawn during the march. Simply deal with them as you have been this entire fight, CCing them and stopping their corpse detonation casts. There is one thing that you need to coordinate between people who you send to the phylactery and the people that deal with the march. Necrotic Empowerment makes it that if you push the remnant of Kel'Thuzad and Kel'Thuzad revives, any of the minions that are still up from the march will have their damage increased by 25%. Make sure that your phylactery team does not push the remnant sooner than your abominations and reavers are dealt with. Every time you successfully push the remnant and revive Kel'Thuzad, he will gain a stack of Necrotic Surge. This is a stacking buff which increases his damage dealt by 5%, but more importantly increases the number of players he targets by Oblivion's Echo and Glacial Wrath by 1. This means you're going to deal with more Devoted and more Glacial Spikes as you get through the second phase. The second phase is basically a loop where every time you push the remnant, you revive KT and you have to deal with the extra Necrotic Surge stacks, which means you're going to have to do everything you just did and kill KT from 100 to 0, except deal with an extra Glacial Spike and Oblivion's Echo. Once you kill KT again, you're going to have to deal with another phylactery phase. Nothing in this intermission phase is different. The remnant has no added abilities. The March of the Forsaken is always the same, so just do what you did the other time. And again, make sure the people that are going down into the phylactery aren't killing the remnant before you're able to get rid of all the abominations and reavers, as to not empower them. The final phase 2 of KT is a little trickier than the other ones because you are going to now deal with 3 stacks of Necrotic Surge, which means you'll have to deal with 4 Glacial Spikes. Our strategy with dealing with the 4 spikes was pretty simple. We dropped 2 of them in melee, blew them up instantly, and blanketed our raid with healing cooldowns. This gave us ample time to deal with spikes number 3 and 4 separately. Similar to Stone Legion Generals and Castle Nathria, KT has its own spell queuing, and based on when you kill or push the boss, you could have different timings and different overlaps. All this really means is that you're going to want to keep an eye on your timers and make sure that you're not blowing up glacial spikes during another big damage event such as Frost Blast. The main reason the 4 glacial spikes are kind of tricky isn't necessarily because the damage itself is too hard to heal, but it's the fact that your DPS players are going to want to be in your, Spirit Link and standing in all of the healing. Make sure you're on top of kicking those piercing wails when the tanks get soul fractured. Make sure no devoted get into melee and cast a corpse detonation. So just keep doing the rest of the fight and respecting all the mechanics that occur. This final intermission phylactery phase is a little spicier than the others. The March of the Forsaken has nothing new, but downstairs the Remnant is now going to do a 3-second cast called Glacial Winds. These winds are pretty tricky to dodge. If you're melee, you're going to want to scooch away from the Remnant to max melee range or even out of melee range, because these tornadoes shoot out of the sky and they come out very quickly. Once the tornadoes get out of melee, simply move into the Remnant and resume DPSing while dodging the Shadowfishers. If you're ranged, a safe way of dealing with the tornadoes is being max range towards the edge of the platform, and when the tornadoes pass in front of you, to quickly scooch towards the boss so that the next time they loop around, they're behind you. The final phase of KT requires a lot less coordination than Stage 2, but has a soft enrage mechanic due to Deep Freeze. Ice patches are continuously going to spawn and grow throughout the room, and the enraged mechanic is that eventually you will no longer have anywhere to stand that is not covered in ice. The beauty of this final phase is that you no longer have to deal with glacial spikes or soul fractures. You're still going to have to deal with Oblivion's Echo, which get trickier to place because of the deep freeze patches that are spawning everywhere and growing in size, and you're still going to have to deal with soaking Frost Blast as a raid. The only other added mechanic is the Onslaught of the Dam, which is a 3-second cast KT will do, which simply summons the adds from the March of the Forsaken. Your best bet at getting through this phase is using Bloodlust here and burning the boss as hard as possible. You're either going to get overran by the adds or by the deep freeze patches. It's important to note that as the deep freeze patches spawn, it's kind of RNG, and your tanks are going to have to continuously drag KT to where there isn't ice on the ground. Alright guys, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to hit the subscribe button. You can also find links to all our socials in the description below, including our Discord community server. There you can keep an eye on live content updates, streams, giveaways, or even sign up for our own IMTB weekly Mythic Community Raid and show us what you got.